So shall I start, or do you want to introduce or something?
I will start. I think Celia, we can start if you like.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Then welcome to the weekly colloquium of the Physics Institute of the UNAM in Cuernavaca. Today we have a guest from Germany. We have Professor Axel Lorke from the University in Duisburg-Essen. And therefore this colloquium will be given in English. Just some very few words about the vita of Professor Lorke. So he did his PhD at the University of Munich, and after some postdocs in Japan and at the University of California, he became a research assistant again at the University of Munich. And since 2000, he is full professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen, the western part of Germany. And he is also visiting researcher at the California Nanosystems Institute and visiting fellow in at the University of Western Australia. His research interests are inorganic and organic semiconductors, quantum dots and nanoparticles, low-dimensional structures, ballistic and quantum electron transport, nanolithography, optical spectroscopy, and diamonds and related materials. Why not? Okay, so
money somehow, right?
Of course. So thank you very much, Axel, for accepting my invitation at this time, because in Germany it's already 8 p.m. and we are looking forward to your talk.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas, and for the nice introduction. And this is a first for me. This is the first time I'm giving an intercontinental talk over the internet. And it's exciting. And even though the reasons we're doing this is anything but pleasant, I'm very happy that you made this possible. Thank you very much for the invitation. Yeah, as it has already been mentioned, I'm going to be talking about micro-optics of organic semiconductors, and this is a very, very. Can you see my my pointer?
Yes.
Okay.
I can see it.
This is a very, very fruitful collaboration that we've had for several years with the University of Tsukuba and the chemistry department there, and. I would love to say I learned a lot about chemistry, but I only learned a little. But it is a very nice example how you can reach across different faculties, and the outcome can be quite surprising. So next week, as many of you will know, this year's Nobel Prizes will be announced in chemistry and physics. And exactly 20 years ago, wait a second, something's not working. Yes, 20 years ago, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry was given to Alan Heeger, Alan McDermid, and Hideki Shirakawa for the discovery and development of conducting polymers. And this was really something that they achieved. And 20 years later, conducting polymers or organic semiconductors are ubiquitous. Many of you might have a cell phone that has a screen that's running on OLEDs, on organic light emitting diodes, that can be fabricated in large screens. You have paper thin TVs the size of a poster. But other typical semiconductor applications, such as photovoltaic cells or semiconductor logic, can be prepared with organic semiconductors too. And the research is still going on, and of course, when you talk about light-emitting materials, which is the most common application so far for organic semiconductors, the next logic step is lasers. You want to build organic lasers. What do you need to build a laser? Well, you first of all need an optically active medium that you can pump very strongly. These days in organic semiconductors, mostly by light, which means another laser. You have to strongly pump it, and in the future, hopefully electrically, until you reach something that's called inversion. And you need a resonator, meaning something that will confine the light and make it, in this case, bounce back and forth until all the pumped medium is drenched, basically, of photons, and the laser beam comes out. This is a very conventional resonator, but resonators are everywhere. Anything that rattles is a resonator, so they don't always have to look like this. And one of the more interesting resonators is a whispering gallery. And that's named after the gallery up here in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, where this was not intended when it was built, but when you walk here on the gallery and you talk, you can hear, even if you whisper, that's why it's called whispering gallery, even when you whisper, you can all along the edge of this hemispherical dome, you can hear the voice very, very clearly. And that is because the waves of sound will travel around this circle here. And since waves share very many common properties, you can do the same also with light. This is an example here. This is just a fraction of a millimeter sphere made out of silica, and it is embedded in a luminescent liquid, so you can see the light. The light is brought in by this fiber here, and you can see how nicely the light travels around the equator of this sphere. And why is that so? Well, you can explain it with geometric optics, where you know that below a certain angle, you have total internal refraction. And that, of course, if you have a grazing incidence here, will lead the light around in n-gon, so to speak, or if it's very, very grazing, then this will even become a circle with infinitely many reflections here. But these spheres that I would like to introduce to you will be quite small. So geometrical optics, ray optics is not the entire story, and we have to resort to wave optics. And if you just take an electromagnetic wave, simplest form in its complex way, that's the easiest way to discuss it. You have e to the I kx, where k is the wave vector. And you can do that, of course, also for a circular path. And then the x will be the circumference. And then, as you know in physics, when you talk about circular boundary conditions, you have to fit an integer number of wavelength inside such a sphere to have, or such a path, to have constructive interference. And that means if you then express the circumference in terms of the angle, that in this circular path, the electric field has to look like this, where you have this term e to the I L phi. And L has to be an integer number, and that's the number of wavelengths that fit inside the loop. The reason why I'm dragging this out so much is because this equation will come up later in a somewhat different context, but it's exactly the same L and it's exactly the same physics. So keep that in mind, and keep in mind that to go around, you need an integer number of wavelengths. So a lot of people have done these experiments, and I have just shown you once where the coupling of the light into the whispering gallery sphere was done by an optical fiber and evanescent waves that are leaking into the spheres. But there is a different way that I'm going to discuss in the following, and that is to use luminescence. You take a sphere and you add a dye, and then when you illuminate the sphere with one color, with one sort of light of a higher energy, it will be converted into light of a lower energy or a longer wavelength, and that will then exhibit these whispering gallery modes, and that light will then be confined to this racetrack around the equator. And for such experiments, you usually have to do a number of tricks. First, you need the matrix material. So you need a very good dielectric that allows the light to pass around uninhibited, very clear. And then you have to make a resonator. You have to more or less make a perfect sphere. But you don't not just need the dielectric, you also need the material that will turn one light into another, that will cause the luminescence, and then you have to integrate the whole thing, and then you can work with it. What was the start of our collaboration is that the group in Tsukuba in Japan had found a way to do all this in a one-step synthesis. And that's what I'm going to show you next. The group is the group of Yohei Yamamoto, who I've depicted here. And we had a joint project that was funded by the German government and the University of Tsukuba. It all looks quite nice or quite simple. You start from something that maybe it does not look so simple for a physicist, but for a chemist, these are not unusual compounds. It's what they call a π-conjugated polymer. Polymer is clear. You have one building block that is repeated n times, where n is a large number, and these building blocks are just joined together in kind of a daisy chain. And π-conjugated, for those of you who know as little about chemistry as I do, means that you have alternating a single bond, a double bond, 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 a single bond, and so on and so on. And you also know that this benzene ring, that these double and single bonds are not cast in stone. You could have put the double bond here, here, and here, because basically the electron is floating around in the entire ring. And just as this double, single, double, single, double, single here means the electron is delocalized over the entire ring, it is also delocalized along this chain, and that's what makes it conducting, but it's not a metal, it is a semiconductor. The electrons are delocalized, just in any good old semiconductor, but you do have a gap, and that makes these π-conjugated polymers these organic semiconductors. So you get this polymer, maybe from friends who synthesize this, and you put it in a good solvent. In this case, it was chloroform. And then you put the entire beaker into another beaker and close the whole thing up. And the other beaker is filled with a bad solvent, in that case, methanol. And then you have something that's called solvent exchange, because the vapor of these two solvents will mix and then exchange with their their origin. And this way, the inner solvent will become worse and worse and worse and worse. And after a while, the polymer will precipitate. And they have chosen this polymer in a way that it doesn't form crystals. And that's very important because crystals will never give you a perfect sphere. But we want perfect spheres, and they were able to get these perfect spheres. So they had to be choosy with this polymer. And this polymer is everything. It is the dye, it is the dielectric, and it is what makes these spheres. Then they brought these spheres to us, and we put them under our micro-photoluminescence. That's why this picture is so small, because it's a micro-photoluminescence. Now in reality, it's much bigger. We have a laser that excites these spheres under a microscope objective, and the luminescent light is collected and is brought into a spectrometer. You can also use the camera, and this is actually just a normal microscopic picture, and you can see individual spheres, and you can already see that they have quite nice optical properties. And if you then illuminate it with a short wavelength laser and detect it with the spectrometer, you see the luminescence very nicely here, and superimposed upon the luminescence, you see these very, very distinct spikes that don't look very regular. But if you remember the formula that I had shown you, that each time when an integer number of wavelength fits inside, you can roughly, from the spacing, guess a number. And then you go to more sophisticated equations, some of which I will show in the following, and then adjust the circumference and the L so that these pairs match, and you can more or less, without apart from some outliers like this one and this one and this one, account for all the spikes here, and then you can quite precisely determine not just the L, but you know also the wavelength, so you know the circumference of the sphere quite well. You see that for every L, you have two spikes, and that is because one is the TM mode, that's the mode that I'm showing here, and the other is the TE mode, where the electric field would oscillate perpendicularly to what I've shown here as it goes around. These resonances are quite sharp. You talk in this field about a quality factor that is here close to 10 to the 4, or in terms of the uncertainty of the wavelength is 162 picometers. So, I mean, the spheres are approximately, let me see, here was a scale bar, are approximately 5 micrometers large. So this is a spectroscopic technique where you get quite high precision. And Daniel Brahm, the PhD student who did these studies, then took a closer look because our microscope has an XY stage. So you can locally excite these spheres and look at the light that comes out. And he saw that when he looked at the edge, he sees these resonances quite nicely. And when he looked at the center, he didn't see anything, which of course is nice, because that's what we thought. We thought it goes around in circles, but it's not as nice enough for Daniel. So what he did was he took a certain range of wavelength depicted here, where in both of these you did not see a resonance, and another wavelength range where one had a very clear resonance and the other did not. And then he scanned the entire sphere and divided the intensity, the integrated intensity in region A by the intensity in region B, or rather the other way around. And if you do that, if you divide these intensities, you can actually very nicely map out where the resonance actually is active, and it's just as we expected. It's going around on the outside of the sphere. And if this doesn't really look like a sphere, that's not because it's not round, it's rather the uncertainty of the XY stage in the microscope. And then he noticed something quite peculiar, really strange. Because when he started this experiment, he had seen the spectrum that I had just shown you. And after some minutes with heavy illumination, he saw that this mode started to split. And when he took a cut at one time, he saw these nice, sharp, double resonances that I had been talking about. And if he did it for a while at low laser excitation, nothing much happened. And if he turned up the laser excitation, he saw this splitting, and it looks very, very regular. And we had to think a while, but then we came up with the reason why this is so. And the reason is that this picture that I have been selling to you, that there is this nice, simple wave that embraces and surrounds the sphere on the equator, is a little too simple. Well, let's dig a little deeper and talk about symmetries. We have a sphere, which is a highly symmetric object. And well, you know, all physicists love symmetry. And for any wave in any rotationally symmetric problem or system, the solution of the wave equation will include a factor e to the IL phi. And that's very simple if you solve any three-dimensional differential equation, wave equation. You can always do it in cylindrical or spherical coordinate, and then the simplest factor that you can split off always has a solution that looks like this. And this actually looks like what you had just seen, right? This is the e to the IL phi that I had pulled out of the hat in the very beginning. But a sphere has a higher symmetry. It's not just rotationally symmetric, it's spherically symmetric. So on top of this, and I think all of you will know that from the hydrogen atom, on top of this, you also have a degeneracy. So each of these solutions of the three-dimensional wave equation with a certain L will be 2L plus 1-fold degenerate. And in atomic physics, you use the symbol ML, which goes from minus L to L, which makes it 2L plus 1-fold degenerate. As I said, you know this from atomic physics, but it is has nothing to do with the Coulomb potential. It's actually the case in any spherically symmetric problem, and it also has nothing to do with the Schrödinger equation. You can also do the same trick in the Maxwell equation, which is what I like about physics, that you can bring these concepts from one part of physics to another one. And here's another concept that I would like to introduce. that this degeneracy can be lifted if you break the symmetry. In atomic physics, you do this by applying a field along one given axis. And it could either be an electric field, then you call it the Stark effect, or it could be a magnetic field, then you call it the Zeeman effect. And the same is true here. How do you break the spherical symmetry? Well, you deform your sphere. You turn your sphere either into an oblate or prolate ellipsoid. And if the distortion is very small, then, well, it actually turns out Maxwell's equations are even harder to solve for a hard sphere than the Schrödinger equation. And if you have just a small perturbation, you can do perturbation theory, and people have done that. And then you get that the resonance frequency, which used to be omega 0, a fixed frequency, starts to fan out according to this term here. This is only the first term in the in a very long series, where the ellipticity goes in and the L goes in and the ML. And Daniel took these formula and looked how much we can find out about our splitting here. And this is the picture that I had shown you before. Let's look at this part of the picture in a little bit more detail. And you can see how it fans out. We also know from the spectroscopy that I had shown you before what the L is. And in this case, I think it's 35. So we know that in principle, it should fan out into 35 different resonances. But you don't see the other side here. That's why I grayed this out. But you can take what we see and adjust it until it fits with our data. And then you get that indeed, this can be explained by a prolate distortion of these spheres by only 3% or about lambda over 10. And this again shows you how sensitive these whispering gallery modes are to very, very small perturbations. And people use this. They can, for example, have a sphere and have molecules attached to the surface. And that, of course, changes the dielectric environment of these whispering gallery modes. And therefore, they will change their frequency. And therefore, you can use this, for example, for chemical detection purposes. Daniel also took an analytic solution for the unperturbed modes. I don't want to call them whispering gallery modes anymore, because now you see how the ML actually influences the electric field. This is the modulus, or the square of the electric field. And you see this picture of just a simple wave traveling around the parameter of the sphere is much too simple. And if you have different MLs, you go more and more and more towards the poles, and this idea that this wave just goes around like this, like a belt around a belly, is no longer true. And let me go back quite a bit to the beginning. Here, you can actually see what's happening here. You see that the trajectory bounces around here, And this is the ray optics equivalent of what we had seen down here. So this was quite nice. So we decided, let's play around a little more with spheres and optics. And this is a more traditional approach. Here we indeed have one material that is the dielectric. It's polystyrene. And a very, very common dye is called body pie. That's used in biology and in chemistry a lot. Turns out the color that the spheres get when you make polystyrene spheres that are dyed with body pie depends on the body pie concentration. If you have a low concentration, they will look green, like you see here. Higher concentration, yellow, orange, or even red if the concentration is more than 1 milligram per milliliter. This is how they make it. It's a slightly different process. You have, again, the good solvent and the bad solvent, and then the solvent exchanges here in the liquid, and the polystyrene with the body pie precipitates in these nice spheres, as you can see down here. And if you mix on one substrate differently colored spheres, you can have light traffic. You can illuminate, for example, a green sphere with blue light. The blue light will make the green sphere luminesce, but if you have another sphere next to it, in this case a yellow sphere, and you excite these whispering gallery modes, they will transfer some of that light from one sphere to another and induce from the green light luminescence in the yellow. So as you can see here, this is the microscopic picture, and you illuminate it here with blue light. And interestingly, this sphere luminesces brighter than this one, even though this one was excited. Now you can say, well, it's just that's what happens, that the other one goes brighter, but you can do the opposite and illuminate the yellow one, and the yellow one will not transfer any light to the green one because it's energetically not allowed. You can turn green light into yellow because it's low energy, but you cannot turn yellow light into green light because it's higher energy. And here's another one. They did a lot of experiments. The two PhD students that were working, one from Japan and one from Germany, were working on this. Here's a nice one where you have, just by coincidence, even though the PhD students were able to push these spheres around with a tiny little needle too. But here you have 3 of these spheres, and you illuminate the one in the middle, and you see that the light is transferred from the middle to the right one, but not to the left one. So here is a faint glow of the middle one. You can't see anything here at the other green one, but you see a bright luminescence from the orange one, which means you have built something like a one-way street. You can bring light, and they have done it for 3 spheres too, one way by illuminating one side of a chain, but the light will not go the other way when you illuminate it from the other side. That was kind of fun, I'm not sure that this is useful for anything, but in the beginning, I promised you that the next step should be lasers. And of course, a resonator, in that case, the whispering gallery modes, is already a good step towards a laser. But finally, we achieved laser action in a more conventional laser cavity. Remember this cavity that I had shown you before, where the two parallel plates serve as a resonator for the light inside the medium? Well, what's really nice about crystals is that crystals have perfectly flat, perfectly parallel planes to begin with. If you take rock salt and you cleave it, then you know that the cleavage planes will be perfectly parallel. And people have used that in very simple fabrication of semiconductor lasers for a while, that this cleavage planes are perfectly parallel. And you can use that. And as I told you in the beginning, they chose a material that does not crystallize, so they get these perfect spheres. But here we have a material that does crystallize. And this is a tip of the hat to the chemists. I am really, really impressed when they build their molecules. They really build them, and then they show in the end that really it came out the way they thought. So this has this unpronounceable long name here, COPV2, and that's the backbone. And if you look carefully, you see again, this is π-conjugated again here with the alternating single and double bonds. And then they stuck these benzene rings on there, here, 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 and here. And just for good measure, these long tails of CH chains. But that's not the important one. The more important one are these Carbazole Dendriners. This is a Carbazole unit, and they fabricated one where they stuck one carbazole on it, then they called it COPV1. Here's, sorry, they called it generation 1, COPV2. Here is generation 2 because it has a carbazole stuck on a carbazole, and that's why they call them dendrimers, because they are tree-like. And the third generation would be another carbazole here, 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 and here. And they built G1 COPV2, G2, which is shown here, and G3 COPV2, which has additional carbazole dendrimers stuck on there. And this stuff worked really well, and they were able to crystallize it. I had shown you a similar compound in this slide. This is generation 3 COPV2, and this has a very interesting way to crystallize because the facets here are curved. So in this respect, it looks like it's not really a crystal, but they were able to do X-ray diffraction, and they say it's on the inside, it's nicely crystalline. Here's a scanning electron microscope, and here you see the photoluminescence, this time under very, very high excitation. That's what I told you in the beginning is something that you need to build a laser. And since you can't continuously excite these fragile molecules, they used a very short, very high power laser excitation, femtosecond laser excitation. And depending on the entire deposited energy in microjoule per centimeters, they either just saw a very weak signal, or they saw these very characteristic peaks that are these resonances inside the parallel plate resonator. And that's already a good sign if you want to build a laser. A better sign yet is a threshold behavior where at low excitation you get a linear increase in the emitted light. And then at some point when lasing starts, you get a much higher slope, and that's why lasers are so efficient, because they very efficiently convert the excited electrons or electron hole pairs back to light, and that's why the slope here is much higher. Here you see some theoretical calculations, two-dimensional finite difference time domain simulations that were done in Jena. And you see that the light is mainly coming out of the tips here and the tips here. And that's exactly what we observe in the experiment. So this very nicely fits together. So we're there. We have shown something that looks very suspiciously like laser action. And I see that I am almost through with my time, so I will not talk about this and just skip a few slides and mention that, of course, this was not done by me. It was done by these guys here. This is Daiichi Okada, who was visiting us, coming to this famous place in Essen. Daniel Brahm I already introduced. Günther Prinz is the postdoc who's in charge of these experiments, and Ashwin did the part that I now skipped in the end. And yeah, I have to really thank these people. Here are the names listed again from Duisburg-Essen and from University of Tsukuba. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'd love to take your questions and comments. Thank you.
Hola, Thomas, this is Gabriel Vázquez. Thomas?
Sí, Gabriel, si tienes una pregunta, adelante.
I wonder, when I would be very interested in listening what professor has to say about the river states in that particular case. So I wonder you will have some 4 extra minutes to allow him to really finish this part of his talk.
For me, it's completely fine. So,
yeah, I support Gabriel.
I didn't tell him to say that. Okay, I'll try to make it really fast. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Oh, wait. Yeah, I had already told you about this dye called body pi. And if you don't use it to dye another polymer, but you crystallize this polymer, and the tricks, okay, I will not go through that, but they were able to make single crystals out of these body pi molecules. And generally they have these green appearance under the fluorescent microscopes, but sometimes they also have bright orange crystals. And this is the same stuff. This is absolutely the same stuff. And in rare cases, you can really tell that because you have in one crystal, you have both crystal phases. And we looked at the green crystals, and you see a nice luminescence in the green. And we looked at the red crystals, and we saw a nice luminescence in the red. And we were trying to understand why you have these 2 phases. And I will skip this a little bit, and this model also, and go directly to these funny resonances that you see in both the green and in the orange crystals. And if you take this, or we have looked at, so Ashwin, who did this, the PhD student, has looked at, I think, 100 of these crystals and has evaluated something between 30 and 50. And if so often you see this interesting fingerprint that I have expanded here. And we try to make sense out of this. Of course, we first thought, oh yeah, it's something like resonances, parallel plate, whispering gallery, going on. Nothing fit, but something fit extremely well. And that is a formula like this, where you plot the energy of the resonances, or the inverse wavelength, which is proportional, of course, against n to the -2, where n is an integer number. And here, this plot is the same, or is something that you get from this data, where n is 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. And minus E0 divided by n squared. That's the Rydberg series, and E0 is the Rydberg energy. Well, this may not be as convincing, but as I said, Ashwin looked at many such crystals, and each time we did the fit, we looked how does this go along with against n to the -2, and we always found an n where this has wonderful straight lines. And what was really wonderful is that all these straight lines were converging at an energy, or an inverse wavelength, that was exactly where the luminescence starts. And if you do spectroscopy on semiconductors and you look at what energy do you have absorption and emission, that's the band gap. And so all these lines extrapolated for n equals infinity to one energy that I have already called the energy gap. And that was exactly the energy gap that we saw from these other experiments, where we just looked at where does emission start and absorption end. So it was very tempting to say, well, yes, this is something like a Rydberg series of, let's say, dopant, or maybe it is an exciton. So each time you have a single charge and you have a loosely bound electron or a hole, a single charge, that is subjected to a Coulomb potential, that will give you these Rydberg series. It sounds very nice, but there are a lot of questions. So I'm very happy that you asked me for it, and I would be even happier if any one of you has any idea what this could be, because we are still scratching our heads because we don't understand what the origin of this could be. Because as nicely as it fits with the Rydberg series, one puzzle is that each of these straight lines has a different slope. So each of them has a different E0, a different Rydberg constant. Now we know that the Rydberg constant is dependent on epsilon, on the dielectric environment, and it's also dependent on the effective mass. So in one material you have a different Rydberg than in another. But here this is all the same material, and each crystal has a very, very distinct E0. There is another puzzle. The other puzzle is, where is E1 or E0 for n equals 1? It is sometimes extremely low in energy, lower in energy extrapolated, if you extrapolate to n equals 1, lower than the band gap. And how is that possible? How can something sit all the way down there? And why do we see these Rydberg states at all? Because usually you only see such Rydberg states in absorption. Because once you brought an electron up into a high Rydberg state, it quickly tumbles down and you don't see it in emission. It will much faster tumble down than recombine and emit. So there are a lot of questions, and if anyone of you can come up with a minus E over n squared rule that is not a Rydberg series, I'd be very happy to hear about this. So this was a quick way through the slides that I had omitted. Thank you for asking for that.
Oh, very interesting, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Axel, for this very nice talk. Are there questions or comments?
I have one question with the last slides we saw. You very nicely pointed out that they all converge to one point, except that there are just a few that don't. What about those? If you can show the picture again.
Sorry, this was not intended. This one here?
No, there is an orange reddish one that has a different angle, and if I extrapolate it by eye, it goes much higher up. Unfortunately, you cannot see my
yeah. Let's see where.
No, so it was on that picture. It was on that slide.
On this one?
Yes. If you just go down with your curve, not this one, no. It is one that you don't extrapolate. A little further to the right. That one. Yes. This one will not intersect at the same point.
Yeah.
It's still a straight line, probably. It's fairly short, but
yes.
Looks pretty straight.
It has it's a short line, right? So it has very few ends. So probably you can wiggle a little bit instead of here you have to check, is it 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, or is it 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, or 8, 9, 10, and so on. So there is a little bit of trial and error involved. Of course, you can take this and you can take distances, and out of two distances, you can try to extrapolate. So it's to arithmetically determine it, but it's not 100%. So this is a plot that Ashwin did. And I think if I took a very close look at this data and would fiddle around, you also see that it's not straight, right? It's bowing a little bit, right? Yeah. This one is also bowing a little bit. So there's a good chance that maybe the ends are not chosen properly here. So I would just take this as an outlier. The ones that are the most convincing are these very long ones here and here.
Thank you.
Okay. Antonio, you have a question?
Yes, I would appreciate if you could comment upon the physical origin of this breaking of symmetry. I'm just guessing it may probably have to do with thermal effects, but I would love to hear a bit more.
Yes. Sorry, I didn't say anything about it. Thanks for pointing that out. So if I understood you correctly, you say, why does the sphere become an ellipsoid when you illuminate it with light?
Correct.
And we believe that it's some kind of photo-oxidation of the material that will cause it to swell ever so slightly. I mean, it's only 3% of the diameter. So this is drastically exaggerated. Daniel checked this by subjecting the spheres to different environments. He did the same experiments in vacuum, and he did the same experiments under nitrogen atmosphere, under air, and it's most likely that it is oxidation mediated by strong laser illumination, because when he did these experiments in oxygen-free atmosphere, he did not see the splitting. Is this an answer to your question?
Yeah. I was just wondering about the competition between dissipation of thermal energy versus the injection of thermal energy into the system, and whether thermal effects may also play a role.
Yeah, but it's a permanent change. If you turn off the laser and then you start again, it does not revert. I see. Okay. It's not that you see these are here. What is it? Almost 10 minutes, right? And I think thermal equilibrium would kick in much earlier, because this was done in ambient air.
I agree.
Or in vacuum, but there was no in vacuum. It didn't show this.
Okay.
Okay. Are there further questions or comments? If not, then may I ask a very basic question? So, Axel, you showed these diagrams which chemists draw for these polymers.
Yes.
And you showed these.
Don't ask me anything related to chemistry.
I hope not. I hope not.
But in the room.
But then you have these spheres, which are, if I saw correctly, on the scale of a micrometer or something like this. Yeah. So the molecules have a length of some nanometers or width below a nanometer, and then they are composed into these spheres of micrometer, the micrometer scale. So how are these conducting polymers aligned in these spheres, and do these properties which you show, so they depend on the scale of these spheres, or can I scale it down to nanometers or just to a single conducting polymer?
So in the spheres, they made sure that the molecules would not align. So that they would sterically hinder each other to align, right? So if you have forks that all have a nice shape, you can all nicely align them. But if you have a sea urchin or a porcupine, that's very hard to align, right? So they made these polymers with a lot of things sticking out that prevent them from crystallization. It is quite interesting when I do a lot of nanolithography, as you know, and the commercial photoresists that the industry uses and that we use, they have molecular weights of several million. So you would think, well, with such a huge molecule, you can never get a nanometer size structure, but you can, because when you, well, they can really ball up to some like a ball of cotton, and this way become really, really compact. Our spheres are small enough that you can see these resonances, so that the size already competes with the wavelength of the light. So there is a optical size effect, a very clear optical size effect, but they are much, much too large to show any kind of quantum size effect for the molecules or the electrons that are moving around on the molecules. I think there you don't have anything in chemistry where you would already see a quantum size effect, if that was what you were thinking of.
And also these properties of the band gap, which you mentioned, they are semiconductors. Does it depend on the size of the system, or on the?
Well, if you make the crystals small enough, then it should depend on the size. Absolutely, just like in the inorganic semiconductors. But then you have to really scale them down to nanometer size. And right now they are trying to make the crystals as large as possible, because that they need that to convince their fellow chemists that they really are looking at what they think they're looking at. They have to do all these analysis, and very important also concerning the crystallinity, they have to do X-ray diffraction. And it's very, very hard to do X-ray diffraction on something that is on the micrometer scale, let alone on the nanometer scale. So right now they're going the other way. They're going to try to make large crystals. Okay. But just from general knowledge, I would definitely say if you make them small enough, you will see different, you would see the quantum size effect. Absolutely, yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Axel. Are there further questions, comments?
I think I have one. You know, I am supposedly a chemist, but I do not know much about chemistry. That's why I find difficult to understand how is it possible that just with molecules who are rather complicated, polyester or whatever, you know, that the chemists in Japan or wherever, managed to really produce something which is practically spherical or completely spherical. Can you enlarge on that?
Yes and no. They can, and they have shown it. And as you see, if it wasn't spherical by only 3%, we wouldn't see these sharp resonances. If we distort the spheres. They grow these spheres in solution. And I can imagine that surface tension plays a big role. You know that kids who blow soap bubbles, they produce perfectly spherical objects. And my guess is that this is the reason why they are so perfectly spherical.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Further questions? Okay. If this is not the case, then thank you again, Axel, for this very, very nice talk. I think we enjoyed it very much. And yeah, hopefully we see you at some point again back in person in Cuernavaca.
Yes. and vice versa. Definitely come to visit us in Duisburg-Essen. It's a nice place here. Well, I've already been to Cuernavaca and I enjoyed it very much, and I can't wait. First I have to visit my mother-in-law, but the next one will be Cuernavaca.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. I enjoyed it myself too.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
I can't hear you, but I can kind of lip read, and thank you very much.
Okay.